ReelAbilities Los Angeles welcomes you to our discussion with filmmaker Michael Gitlin and documentary star Issa Ibrahim of That Which Is Possible. Now you'll get to learn more about their experience with the making of the film and get to ask your own questions. Please welcome our moderator, mental health and disability advocate, activist, and consultant, Adilsa Fernandez.
Thank you. So great to share space with you all. So glad to be here. My name is Adilsa, and I've worked with companies such as Lionsgate and EIF Communications, Inc., specifically on mental health. And diving right into this film, which is about mental health. It was such a phenomenal film. And one of the things that stood out to me right from the beginning in the opening was these two skeletons, which I found absolutely fascinating. It's representative of the body. And one of the things that stand out is the close-up towards the brain. And I don't know, I just found that fascinating since it's a mental health documentary. So I wanted to ask, can you tell us a little bit more of this film, what was the process like, and just diving into this film?
Sure. Thank you, Adilsa, and thanks, Stephen and everyone for having us here this evening. I guess I'll do the description that they talked about. So I'm Michael Gitlin. I'm a older white guy with glasses, could use a shave, wearing a sweatshirt and a little
like Elvis Costello.
Yeah, I look like Elvis Costello. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so a little bit about the background of making the film. The one thing I would say initially is just that I didn't go to the Living Museum with the idea that I was going to make a movie there. I was actually doing research for another film that I wound up becoming this sort of short experimental film that I worked on, that I made. But I was doing research around questions of sort of mental health questions, and particularly questions of sort of schizoaffective ideation, and some questions around that. And I had been doing a lot of research, and I just felt like I needed to be with people that could help me understand that better. And I knew Janos, the director of the Living Museum. And so I decided I happened to be on sabbatical from my teaching job. And so I thought I would see if I could hang out there and sort of volunteer and just do what somebody with my set of technical skills would do, which is take photographs of people's art and help people with computer stuff. And along the way, people sort of started asking me to shoot stuff for them. I shot a music video not for Issa, but for another guy's ensemble out there. And that maybe kind of outed me as a filmmaker a little bit. So then I started shooting more, and I still really wasn't necessarily thinking I was making a film, but then it just kind of organically grew. And it kind of all came together. And more specifically to your question about that mannequin, the sort of human body with the brain mannequin and other objects. I mean, as you see in the film, the museum is a really amazing visual feast. It's really complicated visual territory with lots and lots of details, lots and lots of stuff everywhere. And so as a filmmaker, that presents just, there's so many things that you could do with that.
Amazing. Yeah. And we heard from different folks throughout this documentary. They were sharing their mental health experiences and their art. How do you decide whose story to include and whose art to include? It must have been challenging. I mean, as we're going through the documentary, it's phenomenal art. How do you decide what to incorporate and whose work to incorporate?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say there, of course, is that it's very much self-selected who who is incorporated is who wants to be incorporated. So obviously, working in that environment, you, as a filmmaker, you want to be super aware of, not poking your camera in places where people don't want the camera. And so permission and consent and all of that stuff is always, it's important in any film, but it's really important in this circumstance. And so there were some people who, I mean, I think probably a couple of people whose art was in the film that aren't in the film because they didn't want to be in the film. And then there were a couple of people who I really wanted to show their art and them, and they didn't want that. So there are a few people that, that didn't make the cut because they didn't want to be in the film. But for the most part, it was really, if somebody wanted to be in the film, then I wanted them to be in the film. And I tried not to make like a distinction really about, I think this is really great art, or this art's not that interesting. Or for me, that wasn't really the point. It wasn't really about like, the level at which somebody was working, because it's really not that's not really in a way the point of the Living Museum. It's really about this experience for me as a person coming there, and for the viewer, but really more particularly for the makers. It's this place where they can make work without having to make any excuse for the work, or even justify the work, or have a sort of therapeutic relationship even to the work. It's really just work that flows out of them.
Thank you. And just to describe myself, this is Ajilsa. I'm a person of color, black short hair. I have a white shirt with a shark red tie, and behind me is a white wall. And it's if you can describe yourself in the next question that I'm about to ask. I absolutely love the music in this documentary. It was so relatable. The art, again, phenomenal. And I wanted to ask you, how was it telling your story? Because I know you talk about your mom, and that must be traumatic to go back into those moments. And how do you yourself go through this process of telling and also displaying your art?
All right. Thank you. My name is Issa, and person of color, black male, dreadlocks, getting longer by the day. I'm wearing a black vest, a white shirt, black glasses. I have a goatee. I'm in my office bedroom of an apartment I share with my partner, and it's got painting of hers on the wall, some other ephemera. To answer your question, I had just gotten out of the hospital after being there for like 19 years, like a year or so previous, maybe a year or two previous to when Michael came and started shooting. And I was in the process of trying to make sense of it now as a free man. As an inpatient, there are a lot of hoops you have to go through and jump through to get out, or even to be seen as a human being after something like that has happened in your life. I mean, there's a certain hierarchy of patients, and when something like that has occurred in your life, you're looked at just a certain way. I mean, the stigma is real, and it begins in the hospitals where you're supposed to be getting help. And so I felt that, and I always kind of had to deal with that. So when talking to Michael, that was really the first time that I was trying to grapple with it in a way that I could talk about it and deal with it in case someone were to confront me and say, "Hey, where were you for the last 20 years?" Or ask any kind of question that I felt comfortable answering. And also, just talking to Michael was an impetus to kind of help me get my thoughts around organizing how I felt about it, and how it affected me, and how it still affects me to this day. But it helped me kind of organize my thoughts to around writing a memoir, which I eventually did and released in 2016. So It was traumatic, yes, but cleansing and healing. You know, I always thought when I was in there for those 19 years, I don't want to be a guy who gets out and has to put his coat up and put a hat down and walk around in shame or in fear that someone's gonna out me and then, you know, put something on me that would be uncomfortable, you know. Even though I put a lot of that on myself, you know, because you can't help when something like that happens to you. But I just thought it was a cleansing thing to kind of like talk to Michael, who I developed a trust with and a friendship with, and an admiration for as a budding filmmaker, watching and seeing how the sausage is made, you know, kind of like walking behind him and watching him make a film. You know, I don't think he knew he was making a film, but I just watching his process and learning from him, but also trusting him enough to divulge this very painful and traumatic thing in my life. And just displaying the art, I've never had a problem displaying the art, really. I've been an artist since birth, and my mother really encouraged the arts in me. So it was kind of like a mixed blessing and bittersweet, being locked up potentially for the rest of your life, but coming to a place that has a dynamic art program. So it's almost like a Faustian bargain or something. Some kind, I'm sure there's some kind of Greek, something that Michael could name check me on, where it's like, you know, you're doomed for life, but you get all the riches, really. So yeah, it was just a wonderful experience, and film is fantastic. I really want to thank Real Recovery for allowing it to be seen again.
Now, one of the things that stood out to me as I was watching the film, and I'm pretty sure the audience might feel this way, I felt like there was a cliffhanger. You know, I won't do a spoiler here, but we get part of the story of what happens with your mom is, but we don't hear what happens afterwards. So Michael, was there a reason why the story that came afterwards wasn't told? And Issa, would you like to share a little bit of what happened afterwards?
I'm meaning like what happened in terms of Issa going into the hospital or
yeah, it's almost left to the audience that there's, you know, Issa goes into the hospital, but you know, how long, what happened? It's almost like a cliffhanger.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the film is structured such that, you know, I don't talk about, the film doesn't talk about, you know, what everybody's status is there, because the Living Museum is a real mixed group of people. So some people are inpatients, or at that time, some people were inpatients, meaning that the Living Museum, as the film talks about a little bit, the Living Museum is in this one building on the Creedmoor campus, and then the inpatient population lives in this more modern, kind of scary looking building. What's that? Issa, Building 20, is that what it's called, or something like that?
40.
Building 40, that's right. It was I got it half right. But anyway, so some people live there. Some people lived on the campus of Creedmoor in various sort of nonprofit run group kind of living. What's that?
Halfway.
Yeah, halfway houses. I think that's where maybe you were living when I first. You were living in a place like that, yeah. And then some people live, like John Tercy was living in an apartment off campus entirely. So people are all over the place. And for me, in making the film, I didn't really want to dwell on that part of the story. In a way, it sort of felt like it wasn't germane to the center of the film, which is really about it's really about the creative process in a way for me, as much as being about mental health. It's really about, I mean, those two things are obviously really related, especially for the folks in the film. But for me, it's really the center of the film is really about the struggles that one has as a creative artist. And that's true whether you're, whatever you're dealing with. And so I just sort of felt like I didn't want to, it would also get into kind of tricky legal questions about like telling, the story of like who's living where and all of that. So for me, that was not really part of it. And we already knew from Issa's telling us the story that the immediate aftermath of the story with his mom, and then we knew that he'd been in the hospital. But I sort of felt like I didn't want to go into the specifics of, how long he was in the hospital and all of that. I think he talks about that some, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, right. It's a long journey. It's a long journey after what happened, and then ending up in the system, for almost 20 years. And but it's interesting, and I appreciated not really having to talk about that, and just have them film me at Comic-Con. It's like I get out, and so an art representative says, "I love your work. Would you like to do Comic-Con?" I said, "Sure." So we get a booth, and it was later on the news as one of the 5 funkiest booths in Comic-Con.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that.
So I mean, it was like a triumphant moment after a very dark period, and it's only gotten incrementally better. Now I'm represented by a gallery, as Mike was mentioning in the preamble to this talk, in the city, things are just. I'm living in a very spacious, very cheap apartment in Jackson Heights. Let's not tell too many people how cheap it is. But I'm rolling in it like a pig in mud, and as proof that things do get better. I mean, there are these horrible traumatic moments in your life that you don't think you'll ever get over, and get compounded by some of the administrative issues that happen in major psychiatric centers, which happened to me. Like everything that could have possibly happened did happen. That was bad. But time heals all wounds, and time reveals that things get better, things change, and things have changed for me, and for the better. And I'm in love with someone I've known for 26 years, and when you have a relationship with someone for that long, they know you, and you know them, and there's a level of trust that I never even had as a child, or certainly in the system. I've got a great trust relationship now. I think you may have seen my cat wandering around here. So we've got animals, we've got a full fridge, we've got Netflix, everything's okay. So
one of the things that stood out to me from this film was that it centers on psychosis. And psychosis is an experience that isn't widely spoken about, especially publicly. So what made you focus on psychosis, or what our society calls severe mental illness? And 2, did you know about the diagnosis and a lot of information and resources before going into filming, or did you learn as you went through the filming process?
Well, I think as I maybe said at the beginning, I did. The film kind of came out of this interest in. Again, I don't know quite the best way to say it, but let's call it psychotic ideation, or schizo-psychotic ideation, or schizophrenic ideation. I'm not sure, but and my interest in that really is maybe kind of maybe it's kind of a philosophical interest. Like I'm interested in questions of meaning, like how we make meaning in the world, and how we derive meaning from the world, and I've always been sort of interested in that, in psychosis a system of meaning, as a system of maybe like not enhanced meaning, but like meaning squared in a way, like things seem very meaningful in a way. You get it into your head that something, as Issa describes this thing where he's jumping on and off the subway, and you get it into your head about like the meaning of things. And so I was interested in that as a kind of philosophical question about consciousness, which is a kind of ongoing. I'm a philosophy major as an undergrad and always had that tendency of sort of thinking about stuff like that. And so, you know, that was my sort of, that's where I was kind of coming from. And the sort of thing that I was interested in initially in exploring. And although it kind of reaches into a lot of different directions in the film. But in terms of diagnosis, you know, I mean, the one thing about making a film in the Living Museum or in that kind of environment is that you don't ask more questions than you, at least I felt like one doesn't ask more questions than somebody wants. You don't ask for information, you receive information. You let information come to you. And so like, I didn't ask people like, you know, what's your diagnosis? I mean, that would just be like really, really not, that would be uncool, very uncool to do that. And so, you know, and as Janusz says at one point in the film, like to him, it doesn't matter. I mean, I said something really dumb to him in my interview, like, well, like I said something like, as a question, like, well, you have people that have psychosis and people that have depression, and does it make it difficult to have all these different diagnoses working as a community? And he was like, that's, you know, he basically shot me down, which was good. He said, you know, that's ridiculous. Like, you know, that's not interesting to me, meaning him, at all. Like the diagnosis is not what's interesting. What's interesting is, you know, trying to create a sense of community and all the things he talks about in the film. Yeah.
And this is a good segue to the next question. Do you have any advice for filmmakers who want to highlight mental health while avoiding stigma and misconceptions?
Well, I mean, I guess, you know, a couple of things I would say. I mean, first of all, I have to say that this is not my interest as a filmmaker has always been sort of systems of meaning. So I made a film about, I haven't made other films in this environment. I've made films about other kinds of systems of meaning. And so I'm not really an expert on that subject, but the only thing I would say is sort of the thing I said before, which is, you know, make sure you do a lot of research going in so that you know a little bit about what you're up to and what you're dealing with, and then be, you know, it's like being the problem of documentary filmmaking writ large, which is the problem of documentary filmmaking is how to be a human being around other human beings, how to make a film in a way that's a humane way of doing things, a humane way of being in the world. And that becomes even sharper, that necessity becomes even sharper when you're, you know, with a community of people dealing with mental illness. Yeah.
And usually when we watch movies, especially in mainstream media, you know, psychosis is highlighted as folks who are monsters, scary, evil. It's over sensationalized, you know. What were some challenges in creating this film in order to avoid that, in order to avoid the stigma and misconceptions, or if you even ran through some challenges?
Well, I mean, I think the challenge is how to give people a sense that it's really complicated to try to like show people's interior life, whether that person is dealing with mental health issues or just, you know, a tax accountant, you know, like trying to give some sense of the flavor of somebody's consciousness is really not easy. It's very complicated. It's difficult to do. It's kind of an impossible thing to do. And so, I didn't really want to make a film that pretended that the folks in this that I was working with weren't weren't living a life that was somewhat different than many people. So I felt like it was important to be honest about the condition of people's lives, and also to give some sense of in as much as film can do that, of what their interior life might be like. So a lot of the kind of formal devices in the film, like the editing style, or that scene where it starts with one piece of music and then we go into the sort of, I don't know what you would call that room, you said the chapel room or something, the room that's got like that has the sort of religious kind of quality to it. We go in there and then we come back out and it's a different piece of music, and they all kind of blend together. And in a way, I wanted to give a sense of, and then we go right into Issa talking about this question of the relationship between mental illness and a sense of the divine, or a sense of the
Spiritual.
Transcendent, the spiritual. And so I wanted to give some sense that the formal devices of the film is built so that it hopefully gives you some sense of that, of the interior life of people.
And I saw you jumping in. Do you wanted to add to that?
I think Michael did a fantastic job, really. I got to give him credit. As someone who's a veteran of, I think, 2 documentaries. There was another one that was done in the Living Museum almost 20 years ago by Jessica Yu, and HBO financed it. And not meaning to tear that one down at all, but Michael had so much more humanity, and he became a part of the place. I just loved how it was just conversation. They just happened to have cameras on, and sometimes we talk and the camera wouldn't be on, but there was conversations, and there was a humanity and a level of connection that, for me and him, I think has transcended the film. Because oftentimes, I've read a book or kind of several articles on this, where someone is a documentary, after the documentary wraps, you never hear from them again. They're out of your life, and they go on to other things. But we've maintained a friendship, Michael and I, and he'll always be part of the Living Museum as a volunteer in some capacity or another. And there was a profound sense of humanity that he brought to everyone there, because he brought it himself. He just comported himself as someone who was a decent human being. And when you see a decent human being, you trust them. And you gotta tell people. So.
On that note, what would you say? And on that note, Issa, what would you say is important for a filmmaker to know when working with someone who's been diagnosed with a mental illness, but we also call it having a mental health experience?
Try to, as much as Michael said, it's good to do your research. Yes, do your research. But when you walk in there, unlearn a lot of that and just try to relate to us like human beings. Because I found in the 20 years inside and the 10 or so years being outside, just about everybody's got something. Just about everybody is going through something. Whether or not they get diagnosed and then put on medication is a whole other issue. But everybody's got their cross to bear, and however way they deal with it. And they could be medicating in many ways that have nothing to do with psychotropic medication, but maybe other things. And it's a sick society to begin with. I can go into that, but I won't. But just if for anybody working with people in that community, come into it with a sense of this could be you, and it might be you in another year or so, with another, depending on who becomes president. So just come into there with a sense of humanity, and a sense that we're all the same, more or less, and we all have the same kind of problems. Some people's problems may be a little more profound than others. They may not have been able to handle their problems as well as others, but we're all trying to get through this thing as best as we can. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have questions from the audience. We're going to go ahead and take those now.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question here. ReelAbilities screened the film Bedlam 2 years ago, telling in part the story of Patrice Coulars and other families fighting against the institutional infrastructure that addresses mental health. How do each of you view the role of this film as a catalyst for change?
Well, I saw Bedlam during the ReelAbilities Film Festival, and I was even on a panel with the filmmaker at one point through ReelAbilities and Sasha Altman de Brule. And I found that film to be kind of sensationalist and stigmatizing. You know, it was definitely taking the psychiatrist's point of view, which isn't necessarily my favorite point of view. Whereas if you're talking about whether this film, That Which Is Possible, how can it be a catalyst for change, it allows you to look at people with differences as people you would know and feel something for, and not necessarily look at them going through a breakdown or a mental meltdown like how Bedlam and many other films have done in the past, documentary and otherwise. So like I said, this film really humanizes the mental health experience. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think Issa can speak more directly to that. I haven't seen that film, so I don't know it to speak to it. But yeah, I mean, I sort of took my cue from both in the film and in the verbiage, the discourse that I tried to make around the film, like the description of the film, the synopsis, and the things the language that I want to sort of frame the film with that goes out when it shows at a festival or wherever. I took my cue from Janusz, the director, who, sees the Living Museum as, I think he describes it as a Archimedean point, a fulcrum point that can create change not only in the mental health system, but change in a larger social sense. And that's a fairly grandiose thing to want out of a film, but I think that's the utopian idea that one wants to start work from, or this idea that change is possible, and that art is a part of that, can be a part of that change.
There was another question.
Yes, so you mentioned that back this film was done in 2015. How do you see that mental illness is now portrayed? Do you see a change? Is it for better or for worse now that we are 6 years since you filmed this?
I've noticed that there's a normalization in the media of mental health issues. It almost seems like, and I hope it's a movement and not a moment, but it almost seems like everyone's got their mentally ill character, and they're portrayed in varying degrees of authenticity. That could be the writing, that could be the acting, it could be a combination of the writing and the acting, the directing. That could be the fact that maybe the actor that they chose is drawing on real life experiences, so it seems more authentic. But I've noticed that in the last couple of years, a normalization of the mental health experience. So that could be a good thing.
Yeah, I think I would second that. There seem to be a lot of films and TV series, or sort of Netflix things like Queen's Gambit kind of thing.
Right.
Films that have characters who either explicitly or implicitly are dealing with various kinds of mental health questions. And there's a film coming out, trying to remember, I think with Cumberbatch, what's Cumberbatch's.
Benedict. Yeah, I heard about
Yeah,
that.
Benedict Cumberbatch that I saw the trailer for. Looks really great about that guy in the early 20th century that drew these amazing cat drawings. You know who I'm talking about? I can't remember. Yeah. So anyways, that looks like it's going to be an interesting film. I don't know whether, again, I haven't seen it, so whether it's going to be sensationalized or what, I'm not sure. But you'll have to get on that and see what they're doing there.
And in closing, what message, and this goes to both of you, what message would you like to leave the audience with, particularly when it comes to this film? And what are you working towards now? And are you focusing on mental health, or will you be focusing on mental health in future projects?
Yeah, I'm still painting and still letting my subconscious run wild and unfettered. My message is just be kind. Now more than ever, be kind. Because there's something that a guy who was in the community said to me like 25 years ago that stuck with me in a weird way. He said, be kind and help out that homeless guy you see, because he could be Jimi Hendrix. Yeah, and that's a very romanticized thing, but it's all, I mean, just you shouldn't have to be kind to someone who may be great one day, but just be kind in general. Be kind to people and understand that people are going through things now more than ever. So we have to be good to each other. And I think this film has a gentleness at its core. And I think that's in part because Michael is a gentle soul. You can tell from just talking to him. So there's a gentleness that I think people could learn from and extend further to people outside who you don't know. You might need a gentle, how you doing? Are you okay? Are you hungry? Or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll just second everything Isa said. Agree with him. Why would I disagree about being kind? And then, yeah, I would just add the, again, as I said, sort of for me, a core message, or it's not really a message, but a core theme in the film is the importance of, creativity and I think that's, as Isa said, in these, be kind, because it's a really difficult time that we're going through, and that's completely true. And I would say, I would add to that, be creative, because it's also a difficult time that we're going through, but also it becomes easier and easier with the devices to not have to be creative anymore. It's so easy to just pick up your phone and be fed things all the time. And, I have a 13-year-old, so I'm dealing with that every single day. So make space in your life for creativity, whether that's painting or music or whatever that is, because I think that's how one way of preserving or of achieving some kind of mental balance, I think. Anyway, and I'm still making films. I'm not making films. The film I'm working on now is actually, weirdly, it's about moths, the little things that fly around at night. So it doesn't really have something to do with mental health specifically. It's more, again, this question I'm always interested in about how do we make meaning and how do we organize knowledge? Yeah.
Perfect. I would like to thank you both for this wonderful conversation and getting to know a little bit more behind the scenes of this film.
Thank you, Agilsa.
Thank you.
Yes, and on behalf of ReelAbilities Los Angeles, we thank you so much, Agilsa, for moderating this conversation. And of course, thank you so much for Michael and Isa for being here and sharing this really important piece of your life with all of us, even 5 or 6 years down the road. I think it was particularly telling for that reason. You're invited to join us for the remainder of the film festival. Our closing picture for everyone is the film of Dr. G. Yunupingu's life called Gurumul, one of the most important figures in Australian music and the highest selling Indigenous artist in history. You should begin viewing by 5:30 p.m. so you can catch the whole live Q&A session with the filmmaker beginning at 7:15 p.m. Pacific time. Again, thank you so much for this discussion. Thank you for participating in ReelAbilities Los Angeles.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Steve.
everyone.
Thanks, Ajilsa. Thank you.